Hey everyone, it's Tom here, and on today's video we're going to do a little bit of a follow-up to our last video, which was covering how we should review our journals, how frequently we should look at them, and kind of what information we should look for in the journal in terms of improving our trading performance. So I wanted to dive into that in a little bit more detail on this video and talk about the areas that I look at on what I call my long review, how I assess the performance of my trade over that period, and basically, is there any areas I can look to improve and get a better set of results in my next trading period? So yeah, let's jump into it. Just very quickly before we dive in, if you're still struggling with your trading or you'd like to know more about how mechanical hedges are traded, I've put together a free video course for you that will map out and explain everything in detail, along with walking you through exactly how the mechanical rules actually work. If you'd like to watch that after this video, I'll pop a link in the description. You can click through and you can watch that straight away. Just to give you a quick recap before we jump in, basically the last video covered the way I do my reviews in two sections. So I do a short-term review at the end of every week just to make sure that my trading journal is completed, all the data is filled in, and then I do what I call a long-term review every month or every 3 months, depending on the amount of trades I take on each strategy. And that is where I'll look for improvements. That's where I'll actually analyze the data. So that's what we'll be talking about here in terms of what do I look for. It's the long-term review. So yeah, let's have a look at some of the areas I focus on within my trading data and what we can find in terms of optimizing and improving our performance. So here's my basic journal setup. I use a slightly different journal for each strategy, but most of the information we see here is copied across to every strategy. So it's going to seem very familiar if you have your own journal, hopefully. So this would be the sections that I would fill out as I'm placing my trade. So obviously the entry information I would always want to put in here, obviously covering stop loss, where my profit target is, etc. And what the potential winning R is, if I need a minimum R check, for example, and then the results. So was it a win, was it a loss? What was my profit and loss in terms of my account size? Calculates that, closing price distance, and total R return. So all of that is hopefully fairly straightforward if you've got a journal. If you haven't, and this looks really strange, I would recommend go back and have a look at our previous video we did in the channel on putting together a journal like this, what you need, what's important, what you can ignore as well. But the focus here then has to be on what we're doing in terms of reviewing the data. So before I want to come on to kind of like the actual quantitative numbers, what I want to look at is the observation section that I have here. So at the end of every trade, or during the trade, or maybe at the start, I'll fill out this section here. I'll put some notes for every trade. So if I spot something, does it look familiar to a trade I've just taken recently, etc. What was it about the setup? If there was something that I noticed in terms of the price action potentially, or if I'm using an indicator based on a strategy, is there anything there that I've spotted? And then I'll list a few mistakes potentially that I might occur during the trade. So things like, could I have made the winning R a bit larger? Did I get out too early? Was my risk management correct or incorrect? Did I take the trade when the market was too quiet? This only reflects on a couple of my strategies. So again, I'll tailor these areas to the specific strategy. These are just 3 very generic examples that I've used on strategies before. And that's what I'll need to fill in at the end of every trade or during it. And that's the first area I'll focus on when I come to doing my long-term review. I'll look through these and I'll say, well, did I make this mistake quite a lot? Did I manage my risk incorrectly on a number of trades? And if I did, if I've got a tick in a few of these boxes or a yes, I'll start by saying, okay, what could I do about that? Is that avoidable? Is there something, is it because it's taking me too long to get the trade placed, or my calculations are wrong? What's the root cause behind that? Because managing my risk is vital. So I need to make sure that I'm doing that correctly, as every trader should. And if I'm not, what do I need to do differently? So this section here is vital to understand what can you do differently. Before we even get into the numbers, before we get into the optimization side of it, are you making mistakes? And therefore, in that long-term review, if you've got 60, 70 trades listed down here, since the last time you did a review, how many times are you making these kind of mistakes? And if you are making them, what can you do about it? That would always be the first section I would start on. And that takes up I would say probably about the first third of my time sitting down and reviewing each journal. After that, the next part is I'll look at optimizing the numbers in a little bit more detail. So we have obviously quite a bit of data here in terms of the trading entry information and the result info. But I also like to have a couple of sections at the end. Again, these are just generic examples, but I'll have an optimization section is what I'll call it. So we'll list things like the MFE and the MAE. So if you've watched our video on those two topics, or if you're familiar with them, you'll understand how important and vital they are to improving your trading performance. I'll have those down here. And basically, during this review, I'll go through and I'll fill in these sections. I tend not to bother filling them in during my short-term review every week. If I've got the time, I will do, because it does save me a bit of hassle. But I'll go back through the trades and I'll fill in this section during my long-term review. It might also be things like, trade duration. If you're running a strategy where you're taking a high number of trades at any one time, and you may be close to getting to the limit of your margin, for example, what you want to look for is they're optimizing the trade duration. Are we sitting in a trade for, say, a week to get 5R when we could get out within a day and maybe get 2R, and then move on to another trade there. So that's something I'll have a look at. Things as well like pullback after entry. That's an area that I've been looking at on a recent strategy. In essence, I'm getting in at whatever price, but could I get in at a slightly better price? Could I wait for the market to pull back a little bit towards where my stop loss zone is, get in at a tighter R, and then obviously, the winning R is going to be larger for me. So it's areas like this. And this is what I'll spend the time on going through on that long-term review to understand how much of a difference can this, can putting one of these in place make. Pullback after entry might only be, you're looking at maybe 5 pips difference there on each trade. But over the course of all those trades, does it add up? What's the R looking like now as opposed to what I got just with my base data here? So it's really key to do this step. Otherwise, you're just sort of taking stabs in the dark at areas to improve. That's when traders get emotional, get frustrated. They start making mistakes. They start strategy hopping without the clear data here. And obviously, without having a review and a journal, you're never going to have that clear data to start with. But it's about using that data most effectively as well. And of course, we can have all sorts of info here. These are just, as I said, 4 examples of basically quantitative areas that I've used on previous reviews. But if you have others, obviously add them in, tailor it to the strategy that you're looking at. If you've got indicators, you might want to look at, a specific indicator placement, or, if you're using, say, the EMAs, what's the duration of your EMA? Could you change it? Could you get a slightly better entry, a slightly better profit target, etc.? So they're the things to really to look at there. So that, in essence, is a summary of where you want to be in terms of this review process. So following on from, like I said, the first video we did on this topic a little earlier in the week, we need to do these reviews. We need to do the short-term and the long-term review to make sure we capture all the info and we use it most effectively. But looking at what we've covered here, hopefully will give you an idea of the areas that you want to focus on when you're doing that long-term review to get the most out of your strategy performance. To look for areas that maybe you have avoidable mistakes, and also to look for refining the entry position, the stop, the profit target, the trade placement, etc. All those factors. Without doing this process, and as I said in the previous video, it takes me between 1 and 2 hours per strategy to do this every month or every quarter. It's not a huge amount of time investment considering some of the results and the improvements I've seen over the years across my strategies. So I absolutely kind of enforce that point. It's really useful. It's definitely worth doing, especially if you even, if you are filling out a journal, are you using that at all? Are you just filling out for the sake of it? Well, if so, kind of wasting time then. So you might as well do this because you've spent all the time gathering the info. So that's everything we're going to go through on today's video, guys. Hopefully that's been useful in terms of areas that you would look to focus on when you're completing that review of your journal. If you'd like to see us cover any other topics, drop a comment below. Any suggestions are more than welcome. If you'd like to find out how we trade in a little bit more detail, there's a link in the description to speak to one of our team just to talk about our trading methods, our strategies in a little bit more detail, certainly. But other than that, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully that's been useful, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video. Take care.